Welcome back to WNY News Now. Saturday marks the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 terrorist attack in New York City, outside of Washington, D.C., and a field in Pennsylvania. Images broadcast across the world on September 11, 2001, shocked a nation and inspired many to help, including Jamestown Fire Chief Matthew Kuhn, who at the time was just starting out with the department here in Jamestown. Chief Kuhn joins us on the program now. Chief, thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
First, I want to ask you a question, sir, that seems forever sketched into our history. Where were you on that fateful day?
I was actually at a service station having my wife's car inspected at the time that the planes were reportedly striking the World Trade Center towers. And as a firefighter's mind works, my first question was, well, are the buildings on fire? I didn't have access to a television at the venue that I was at right at that moment. So thinking it's just some small private plane that possibly struck the towers, was there anybody injured there, or the buildings on fire? Then subsequently, like most everybody else, when I returned back home, I was kind of glued to the television to see the horrific acts that were underway in New York City, and watch how the whole situation kind of unfolded and then deteriorated down to which culminated in such a large loss of life. Just the sheer magnitude of the entire event was just breathtaking, and it still gives me chills to this day.
Yeah, and I don't think anyone would have thought that not just one tower, but both towers would have came crashing down. Mm-hmm. When did you know that you wanted to join the effort to respond to New York City? How quick was it since the day passed and everyone heard the news that this had happened?
Mm-hmm. New York State has a statewide mobilization plan which was implemented at that time. It generally goes by county, and since we're the most westernmost portion of the state, we were about a week into the event before Chautauqua County was actually tapped to send resources and personnel down to the Trade Center to help with the rescue efforts. I was fortunate that I was selected along with another member of Jamestown Fire Department. At the time, it was Lieutenant Sam Salemi. Both he and I represented Jamestown Fire Department along with some of our colleagues in Chautauqua County. And we took Bustey's ambulance and Asheville's ambulance down to the Twin Tower site.
Gotcha. So when you were there, what types of duties did you have in Manhattan? And what was that city like at that time?
It was a very surreal experience. When we first reported in, we went to an area called Chelsea Piers, which is on the west side. That's where the staging area was. Our primary goal for going down wasn't to assist with the recovery efforts on the site itself. That was pretty much reserved for FDNY, the New York City Police Department, and the Port Authority, and whatever contractors they brought in. Our primary role was to provide emergency medical services to the surrounding area and also to treat any workers that were actually working inside of the site itself.
How busy of a time was that for you when you were out on the street helping people? Did you encounter a lot of folks who, a week later following the collapse who needed assistance?
It was a secured area. We had to have credentials to actually proceed south into Manhattan below 14th, so there wasn't a great deal of general public walking around in the area. The power was off down there. There was a lot of activity as part of the ongoing recovery efforts. We did treat one iron worker that was injured while he was working on the site itself. He was injured by some steel in the area. Fortunately, we were not requested to do any other assistance within the area. There were no other calls reported to us while we were located both in the staging area and at the Trade Center site itself.
Yeah, gotcha. But I imagine there's probably a lot of moving parts, and I know we were discussing a couple months ago about the Jamestown Royal Fire and how big of an operation that is for our area. But when you look at something like what you had in New York City and the aftermath of the building collapses, correct me if I'm wrong, but the nation hasn't seen anything to that scale like it did on September 11, 2001.
It's certainly not. Any large-scale event is always met with a certain amount of what we call controlled chaos. There's always a lot of moving parts to that. You're absolutely correct. The incident command system was put into place to try to manage that event. Accountability becomes a very large problem. It's mainly about keeping everybody safe, and part of keeping everybody safe is knowing where everybody is located during the course of the event. So they did implement that. It was a very controlled environment. There was lots of armed security walking around provided by the military. It was a very tightly controlled ingress and egress as to get access to the site. We had to have credentials to go everywhere, and we were spot inspected to make sure that we were authorized to be in the areas that we were located.
And I see today you brought some artifacts, so to speak, back with you from that day.
I did.
Can you tell us the significance of what you have?
Certainly. So when we went down to deploy and we rotated through our shifts, we had to have a place of staging, all right? This would be a place off-site. And they ended up arranging for accommodation for the response crews to stay on the United States naval ship Comfort. So when we were waiting to board the ship, it was kind of a surreal experience. It was parked right next to where the USS Intrepid is located on the west side. And so we had to walk down this long pier, and there was a long gangway plank to walk up into the ship. And there's armed security, again, walking around with like M16 rifles, making sure that we were safe. So we proceeded up the gangplank, and when we walked into the ship, there were some civilian staff that were in there checking everybody in. And just past that checkpoint, there was 2 civilian members handing out stuffed animals to the rescuers. And that's actually what this item is. It was something that they handed to us, and they said this came from the families of the survivors and of the rescuers for the Murrah building in 1995.
Wow.
They said, we understand what you're going through. We just wanted you to have some token of appreciation that we could send to you that would express our empathy, if you will, understanding exactly how horrific a terrorist incident is, since they had just lived it 6 years prior.
Yeah.
The hat that I have here, this is something that they gave us when we disembarked from the ship. It's kind of something just to kind of remember our time actually staying on that vessel.
Yeah.
I had never been on any floating vessel of that size. It amazed me that something that large can actually float. But definitely was quite an ordeal, quite an experience. We were not permitted to take any photography while we were there. You could obviously not remove anything from the site. It was all considered kind of a sacred and secured area. So. But these 2 artifacts are something I was able to bring back, and I will have them the rest of my life as a reminder of what we experienced when we went down there to assist in that effort.
Absolutely. A lot of people have judged history and pre 9/11 versus post 9/11. As for you as a firefighter, do you compare your career to pre and post 9/11, and has anything changed within the fire service?
Some things have, some things haven't. I mean, the fire service is very resilient that way. It's a very mature industry that way. I can say, only speaking from my own observations and my own life experience, that there definitely was a pivot point in the fire service pre 9/11 versus post 9/11. Up to that particular point in time, no fire service agency or any public safety agency, for that matter, had ever faced such an incident that was of that magnitude, that large. Where do you possibly begin? So there's some good things that have come out of it. Very unfortunate for the loss of life that occurred to drive those changes, obviously. But there were good things that did come out ultimately. I think the fire service nowadays is better prepared. There's more interoperability between law enforcement, fire, EMS, and any other supporting agency that would go into affecting an effort such as that. So in a certain manner of speaking, it kind of raised the bar and raised everybody's awareness of this is how bad it can really be, and anything that you can do to prepare for something like that is obviously going to be better going forward. And thankfully, we've not had another incident of that magnitude, and I certainly hope we never do, to actually put those skills into place like that.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there. What finally would be your biggest takeaway from your time there in New York City and Manhattan, helping those on the front lines in this effort?
My own personal experience with it, it was a very moving experience. Having grown up before 9/11 and seeing what the world was like, and then the post 9/11 world, that obviously was a certain loss of innocence that came out of all of that. And nobody even in my life up to that point, never dreamed that we'd ever have any type of an incident occur on American soil. So I think there was a certain loss of innocence that came after that day. The country definitely has not been the same since that day. And we're a very resilient nation that way, and we will, obviously adapt, but it definitely created a new normal. And both as far as my life before, my life after, I will always remember the experience that I had down there and what I saw when I was there, and will always reflect humbly on the fact that I was able to go there and actually help with that effort.
Yeah, absolutely. Chief Kuhn, thank you so much for your time today,
Certainly.
sir. I really appreciate the insight, and for folks who maybe were born, post 9/11, and there are a lot of people out there. For me personally, I was 4 years old when that happened, so I don't have much of a recollection. What would you say to them who are watching this, and definitely not for the first time for many of them learning about what has happened, but at 20 years looking back at this, what would be your message to those young people in our community?
Never forget history. While it may be something that may be beyond somebody's memory to recall the events of that day, and I'm understanding that anybody that's grown up post 9/11 doesn't know a world prior to 9/11, but always just be thankful for what you have. Events can occur in the blink of an eye. Take every day for what it's worth and enjoy your time, because you never know when something bad's going to happen. Please be respectful of others, and obviously of first responders that have been involved in an incident like that. It was a traumatic experience for them, and it does mean something different to everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Chief Kuhn, thank you so much.
Certainly. Thank you for having me.